Hey everyone, this is Kevin Sharp. I'm here today with artist Bret Blevins to talk about a page he loves. Bret, I want to welcome you to the CAF Plus channel, and I know we have a lot of fans of yours watching. We're real happy to have you here.
I'm glad to be here. I
So,
can say that it was really hard to choose one page, but you
yes,
probably get
I was just going to tee you up for that.
that.
Um,
Yeah.
you have landed on this is our first Steve Ditko pick, but it's not Spider-Man, it's not Doctor Strange. Would you please introduce to the viewers what comic we're talking about today?
It is a black and white wash tone story from Eerie #6, Warren magazine. And I checked it out. It came out in 1966. He was still finishing up at Marvel at that time. So there must have been a little overlap here. Almost 50 years old. Is that right? 60 years old? 60 years old, yeah.
Where would you have been in your reading slash collecting journey? Did you find this magazine fresh on the stands, or was this something you would have discovered later?
I would say later, not too much later, but probably before I was 10. But I had an uncle who loved comics and collected a lot of fantasy pulp novels and things like that. He really kind of steered me in this direction, I have to say, way back then, that I ended up spending my life working in. I remember this made a vivid impression on me. That's how come I went back to it.
Well, before we dive into this, would you have been exposed to Ditko before seeing this through his superhero stuff?
Yes, when I was a small kid, like I wasn't in school yet, so maybe 4, something like that. My dad worked with a guy who just loved to read comics and toss them in a box. And one day he said, "Hey, you've got a kid. Do you think he'd like these comics?" And he brought home these boxes of comics, and I remember we stacked them up, and they were taller than I was. And they had everything. They had the early Marvels and Dennis the Menace and anything that was around. This guy just liked to read comics. So I had him around, and I did love Spider-Man. I'm sure it had a lot to do with me wanting to or learning to read at that time because wanting to know what they were saying.
Why don't we jump on in then? This is primetime Ditko with some beautiful wash here. Talk to us about what is it about this particular page that you chose out of even out of this story that you chose? Why did you narrow down this page?
Well, mainly because of the variety of scale that it has in it. I mean, your viewers are seeing the page, correct?
Yes.
Well, it has those a very large panel at the bottom over half of the page, and it has two insets, which really increases the space. And then on this particular page, the camera really moves in and out quite a bit on those first two frames. The second frame of the wild, madly laughing guy, his hand is actually larger than life size, at least by my hand in print. The fingers are bigger than my fingers. So you're that close, then you're way out, as you see on the bottom. The guy's just disappearing into all these dimensions, and it just has this wonderful invitation to this wild imaginative leap, which he was so brilliant at doing and using very simple means, really. But no one else could ever really get these feelings of all these dimensions overlapping so directly, so clean.
I can imagine what it would be like reading this as a kid with a limited exposure to comics before seeing some of this madness. Uh, as a professional now, with all the years of experience you have, when you look at this page, what jumps out at you as far as the art techniques go?
Well, I actually got to meet Ditko several times in the 80s, and I asked him about these. We were actually warned, don't mention Spider-Man or politics. He'll be fine. And that was turned out to be true. He was very nice. But I asked him about these jobs. He said he'd never worked in wash before he started doing these jobs for Warren. So he was kind of learning as he went here. It's printed in black and white, but as a young kid, it just had so much more dimension because, as you know, the coloring was very flat. And in those days, newsprint days, you couldn't really get anything stronger than a pastel color in terms of intensity. So although this didn't have color, it had so much body to the rendering that it really gave it a sense of 3D that you didn't often see. One of the things that's so brilliant about Ditko is he never, that I know of, made a false step in terms of clarity for storytelling. You never see a panel of his saying, I wish I had seen something else. I wish he had shown me more of this. He always shows you exactly what you need to see. And that's very evident on this page. And I chose this one again just because of the particular configuration on this page of the variety of shots. because the whole job is full of bizarre, bizarre, weird flights of fancy. But this particular one has some acting in it. It shows because one of Ditko's great skills, in spite of his odd drawing, his drawing's kind of clunky. You don't see a school of people who imitated Ditko's drawings. That never happened. But his exaggeration of emotion is always very, very vivid. His characters are really feeling what is happening to them. And even though they may be drawn in this odd, sort of boxy, clunky way sometimes, they're really totally moved by whatever the situation is. And I responded to that as a kid. Intensity of emotion. No one just seemed to be walking through the story. They were really affected by what was happening.
Super stylized artists like Ditko could be a little off-putting to young readers versus more of a more clean, maybe, but just as an example, Kurt Swan, Wally Wood type art.
Right.
Was Ditko for you, to the best of your memory, as you kind of went on in your reading and collecting, was this someone who you responded to on a regular basis?
Yeah, for sure, because he was still working when I went to Marvel. He was actually doing ROM, the Space Knight, and other things like that. Beautiful ink by Craig Russell, the ROM work. Um, and at that time, it seems like some of his youthful vigor might have calmed down a little bit, but not his imagination and his clarity. And he was still doing really bizarre things like Shade the Changing Man and bizarre concepts that he always amazed me at how simply he could get those strange ideas over with the simplest delineations. If you think of someone else who was really great at psychedelic ideas like Mobius, very complicated, incredibly detailed rendering, and there's a lot of work to sort of decipher everything you're seeing, but Ditko just lays it out for you right there. You don't have to work to understand what he's trying to show you.
Well, I know the answer to this next question already, but for our viewers, I have to ask, do you own any Steve Ditko original art, or have you ever in your collection?
Sadly, no. No, I never came across one that I could get my hands on.
Well, I guess we can put the call out. If anybody sees this page in the wild, Brad, I know you've got your millions saved away from your career in comics.
Yeah.
You can
Well,
pounce.
I've never actually seen one of these Wash originals, so I don't know if he kept them or he didn't get them back. I don't know.
Thank you again. This was a really a treat to look at this kind of a deep cut and probably not what most people obviously would think of when you hear Steve Ditko. So we really appreciate you taking the time and joining us today.
More than welcome. I'm always glad to talk about a brilliant cartoonist.